everyone. Welcome in. Welcome in. My name is Zoe. I am the community and youth organizer here at Women Engaged. And welcome to Yawa. So we have a very great episode for you guys today. I don't know if some of you have heard, but we have some more information about student loans. So excited to get into that conversation and also get into more of the conversation expanding on what expanding healthcare means in the state of Georgia and also reproductive health and things of that nature. But before we start, I would love to go over just a couple of organizational updates. And if you're watching, please drop where you're located and what you think about the student loan situation. I would love to hear. So first, organizational updates. If you want to update your voter registration, please visit our website for more information, www.womenengage.org. And we are also hiring canvassers. So if that is something you may be interested in, please email your resume to info@womenengage.org. And now I would also like to go over one of our campaigns. So we are asking for donations for our 828 campaign. And just for like a little bit of background, for the past 18 months, our voter engagement canvas teams have operated virtually, prioritizing the health and safety of both our staff and communities in the COVID-19 pandemic era. Many members of the communities we serve and from which we recruit and hire were hit hard by the detrimental effects of the pandemic, either disproportionately impacted by the ravages of the disease itself or the resultant economic and financial fallout from job loss to food, housing, childcare, and transportation cost increases. Now, as we navigate plans to return to in-person engagements, we are asking the Give828.org community to support the purchase of a company passenger van. The acquisition of this van would enable us to affordably transport staff to in-person engagement sites, including community events, and to help provide voter transportation to the polls in the wake of super voter suppression measures enacted by the Georgia General Assembly and Governor Brian Kemp this year, designed to decrease voting accessibility. So as you can see, we have the link right below. So if you guys are interested in sharing, because sharing is also very important, donating, or just getting the word out, you can visit give828.org. So thank you guys for that. And now we're going to get into the episode. So I am joined by, of course, Kai, who is our legal and reproductive justice fellow. And we also have Michelle, who's our COO. And yeah, hi, you guys. Happy Thursday.
Hi everyone.
Yes, happy Thursday indeed.
Happy Thursday. So I know we had like a whole plan of what we were going to talk about today, but I would love to talk about student loans and what was said yesterday, how we're feeling. I know for me personally, I've always said those loans are up to God. So I I don't know what's gonna happen, but I know for me, God is handling it. But I would love to hear how you guys are feeling, if you're disappointed, if you're happy. And yeah.
I'm feeling some type of way. I'm feeling some type of way. And I only say that because like school's expensive. Let me put it like that. School's expensive. And so when I looked at those numbers, I was like, especially for folks who like went to private institutions or things like that, like that's like a drop in the bucket. Like $10,000 literally only covers what room and board costs the first year that I came into school. Because I always remember that number. It was like 9,000 some odd dollars. And I asked myself, like, what does that do in the grand scheme of student loans? Especially because we got folks walking around here, especially folks who's got graduate degrees with like six figures on their head. And it's like $10,000 to a six-figure amount does what? Like, what is it? What are we doing for folks? Really, in terms of like actual relief because of how student loans like impact like our abilities to like access housing and other like opportunities because of like the whole credit system, which is the whole little thing. We can go on credit system, the whole thing, but like I'm just like I'm feeling some type of way, and I feel like this is like the bare minimum of what could be done. I don't know if it's that they're just trying to test the water to see how responsive it is, because I guess student loan forgiveness is so controversial, but I just feel like instead of dipping a toe in, just jump in the water. Just jump in. Just go. So
Yeah.
those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah, some of my initial thoughts. I'm still processing how, how I personally feel, but I definitely two things for me are just how this is means tested, and how when it comes to supporting folks who are trying to get an education, trying to um you know even in many cases, like um support their families with student loans, that it usually hits um people who are likely going to take out more loans the hardest. And so that, I don't feel like that's really taking that was I it doesn't this doesn't take any of that into account. And while saying that in a sense that it does, but it also um I just think about that the statistic we all know about is that Black people, and specifically Black women, are the highest educated folks in this country, meaning we go to school longer for on average. And so we're likely to have more loans, and we kind of have numbers that show like the average amount of student loans that are taken out are in like the 20,000s, but for Black women specifically, it's closer to around $57,000 in student loans on average that are taken out. So it's impacting us differently across racial and gender lines when you think about how did they come up with that number, and is it truly fair for for folks that find themselves going to school more and longer, due to trying to navigate this society that discriminates and has different standards for us. And the second thing I think about is just the fact that I know that it is going to help like a lot of people. And I feel like I know personally some folks that this has changed a lot for. And so I'm just really grateful for all of the organizing that went into pushing elected officials beyond what they were comfortable with, and that we should never lose sight of the goal. The goal was forgiveness of all loans. The folks that accomplished this, their call to action was to abolish, student loans entirely. And so I don't think we would have gotten this far without that the eyes on that prize. And so we shouldn't forget and know that this moment was probably possible for an administration like Biden's because of folks that were pushing them well beyond that, and that this is just the beginning. I think it's just the beginning.
Yeah. I love that, Kai. You are in a much better space than I am. Because I think it's like, to your point, because I was thinking about the statistics too about the impact on Black women. And I love that, like, it does help a lot of people. Like, I know personally I have folks who like were so close to paying off their student loans and now are like free of that because of this bill. And I'm very happy for folks like that. I'm also like, I don't know, like I feel like this is also where I think about not even necessarily just student loans, but when we start talking about like the cost, and this is kind of segueing a little bit into like the cost of living kind of stuff, because as truth be told, like especially as I got into grad school, student loans weren't just used for education, but also was a way to live. Like I could not afford rent or a vehicle to get to school without using a portion of my student loans for that. And I don't like regret that decision, but like really starting to think about like what it means to, in terms of like the cost of education and what it means to actually fully fund it. And that a lot of these schools and institutions are way overpriced. Because I think like what is the statistic that like we're like 400% higher than what tuition used to be like in the 70s and 80s or something like that. I don't know the exact statistic off the top, but it's something around those numbers. And I think about just also too like the rising cost of living and the lack of wages and stuff like that, and the amount of struggle. Because even with the student loans, and using that to cover my rent. There were periods of my life where I was holding down like 3 jobs and doing like 2.5 side hustles to make ends meet. And so I think that's why for me it's like, yeah, $10,000 is helping people. But also, like, when we start talking about that, I feel like student loan forgiveness, forgiving all of it is just the first step. But there's so many more issues that we need to tackle, like they need to put a cap on the cost of education. Like, the government needs to go ahead and start up front subsidizing education costs, especially if you have a market or an economy that basically makes it to where people have to get secondary education after high school, whether that's trade school, 2-year institutions, associate degrees, or like just certifications. Like, we're living in a time now where you have to continue education beyond high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, so what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing? And I'm looking at, like, we see other countries who are like living a model that supports people to assume these things, whether it's through, covering apprenticeships, things like that. And so that's why I'm like, I just be feeling some type of way about it.
And for that reason, you just said it, Michelle, like, can we stop calling it forgiveness? Like, this is debt that, the government created, this infrastructure for, and now, we're forgiving people of it. It's very, like, I'm struggling. I think in light of this forgiveness scheme, I am starting to remember that it really bothers me that, we even talk about it. Like, like you just said, Michelle, like, we haven't created these almost impossible, what is it? Situations for folks to where they have to take out these loans in order to, if they decide they want to, like, go in a certain direction or pursue a certain path. Also, not, all of us here are doing work that, is like a civic engaged work. We're doing work for our communities. We're doing work that centers trying to change and, come up with solutions to these societal pressures and oppression and issues. And so we're taking out loans in order to go back into, like, which is not like, we didn't have to, but that was, I feel like I speak for myself personally. I pursued my education in order to better equip myself to do a certain kind of work. And it is kind of like, do we want to punish people, or do we want to dissuade people from looking at all the different pathways they can to do, work that they might be drawn to because they want to help, because they want to change things. They see that things should not be the way that they are. They should be different. These are the folks that are, like, likely to be saddled with, like, those super high amounts of debt, going to graduate programs, and things like that. So, it's kind of like folks who may go on paths that might be, less centered on, solving these problems or whatever. Will they have as much debt in the long run because they might be going into fields that might make it easier for them to pay it off?
So true. Because I always think too about, like, because people are bringing up to, like, the public service loan forgiveness program. Like, if you work with, like, a nonprofit or some like government entity for like 10 years, you can get your loans forgiven as long as you make, like, on-time payments throughout that entire time. But that's also, like, the entire idea that, like, I have to pay it back as if though we didn't work for the degrees in which we signed up for is kind of weird to me. It's like as if though, quote unquote, like, what is it? Like, my own personal politic is that I never agree with, like, the commodification or the ways in which we try to make education, quote unquote, a luxury. Like, education should be accessible for all folks who are interested in learning it. And if we're trying to encourage people into these roles and stuff like that, I mean, especially, like, if we're talking about public service positions, oftentimes are historically underfunded and underpaid. So, like, what are we really doing here in terms of, like, what people are already paying? Because I know for me, I've been in positions before where, and like other organizations where I was like, my payment to the community is the pay cut in which I take by assuming this role for the community. Like, wait, I mean, that's how I've always viewed it. And so I'm like, what are we doing here when we continue to ask people who are already struggling before to who are also still trying to establish themselves to say, okay, you just graduated, you got 6 months to get it together. When the reality is the landscape isn't even suited for that. Like there are people who spend sometimes years trying to get gainfully employed in their field of study and or just in a place that utilizes to ask for a degree. And so I don't know. And then that brings me to the other point too, is that like for some of these employers, especially in the private sector, they're not always paying a wage that includes people with degrees. So like these wages need to go up. Because it's like, if you're going to say that your position requires a bachelor's or a master's degree, then your wage needs to consider that these people are paying back student loans. Like, am I tripping? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you need to pay, like that needs to be included. Because if it's not, then like, you're not really paying people fairly for the expertise that they're bringing to the table.
And I love that you guys brought that up because I saw this tweet that was like, we talk about like racial disparity and like, different things like that, and how there was a cap like on this, like if you make more than 125,000, then you don't qualify for some of this like forgiveness. And I saw a tweet that said Black people's 125,000 is a lot different from white people's 125,000, and how usually when we see Black people going to college and getting their masters, it's usually a communal thing. Like we're all trying to get this person through college. We're all trying to get this person. And then once they finish, they come back and save not, I don't want to say save, but like, they're there for their community in ways that their community was there for them. So then we think about, people who are coming, going to college and then coming back and paying their mother's bills or paying their family's bills, or, or helping their little sibling get through school. So we think about, and we you see rent in Atlanta, and like, excuse me, you gotta make that much money to survive, to live in Atlanta. In most cities, a 2-bedroom is like $2,500. That's insane to me. So when we think about how the cost of living, like you said, Michelle, has gone up tremendously, and you put a cap on something like that, and to me, like when I saw that tweet, I was like, because we do think about how usually when Black people do go to school, they're going to school and they're coming back and they're taking care of their families. So it is different, So I love what all of you guys said, and I definitely agree. We need more, but we gonna keep fighting for more because college should be affordable.
Yeah, it should be. And that's why, like, shout out to what Kai said earlier about like the activists and folks who have really been putting a lot of pressure on these politicians to even get to this point, because I feel like student loan forgiveness has been a topic of conversation for like years. Mm-hmm. Like, and I felt like too, especially like as of late, was really feeling the pressure about it because, as we know, we got the midterm elections coming up. Mm-hmm. Folks are worried about people showing up and things like that. And folks have been very vocal this time around about where they stand in terms of holding their elected officials accountable to the promises that they made on the campaign trail when it came to student loan forgiveness. And I think that, it's really important to acknowledge that aspect of it. And also to like, it's kind of like, okay, if you can do this, just know, like, I think it's like, if you can do this, we shouldn't let up the pressure now. Like, it's more so that this is a sign that we need to continue to like up the pressure, like up the fire, in terms of what it looks like to tell people that like, okay, thanks for that drop in the bucket, but the bucket is still empty. Like, there's a lot to do here. Like, hey, we got like a little taste of water. I appreciate it, but I'm still thirsty.
Yes, and we know that the U.S. can raise the federal government, the executive office can raise billions of dollars for imperialism. Like they can print money, and we know that that the way the budget is used when it comes to the military budget, all of those things, that there's money there. They pay for things that they want to pay for. And so I do think it's also important that we just like don't lose the plot, that we are really grateful for those organizers, and we kind of, for the folks that this made a huge impact for and really benefited from this, like stay engaged, stay, activated with people who say that the goal is debt freedom when it comes to student loans, because debt freedom for student loans is not mutually exclusive from, predatory lending debt freedom. It's not mutually exclusive from all of these other like forms of debt freedom that folks are fighting for and like want. And ultimately, like they're all aligned with this idea that we should be able to like live comfortably, protect our families, uh, feed ourselves, like rate, like again, like put back into our communities, just be able to um all of us access a life that is um livable, and where we have enough. And so I hope that like we just can stick with this idea of debt freedom, not only in this respect but in other respects as well, going into like this election season, right? Because like Michelle, you just said, um folks were very vocal. And so I feel like the Democrats knew, and this administration knew, that this could not go unanswered for long without impacting the results that they would want in, those primaries.
Yeah, like I don't know, it's just so much because it's so layered, and I think it kind of gets into a point we're going to talk about. It's like your reproductive justice living wage, because that's what it is. Like a reproductive justice living wage is the ability to be able to care for yourself and your family, to like have a great quality of life and be able to have a wage that is able to allow you to afford that and afford certain like abilities just to live and navigate life, not necessarily living like paycheck to paycheck or living on like the credit system in conjunction with your wages. Like I think that's really important too when we start thinking about and expanding the scope of the conversations, especially in light of Roe versus Wade, because it's like, yes, abortion rights, but when we start really peeling back the layers, a lot of problems are really stemming from this capitalist structure, the economic issues that are plaguing people, and it's all very much connected. So like when we even like talk to people who some folks who are seeking abortion care, sometimes I think in the study, I'm trying to remember the study specifically, but that like a good number of people had actually said that like the reason they were seeking abortion care is because they could not afford to have the child. And this is also coming from people who are already married with children. Like they just like, look, I already have 2 or 3 kids. I can't afford another child. And in my mind, it's like, are we really leaning into our values where people are making those kind of decisions based off of the fact that they can't afford? Because that doesn't mean that doesn't say that they just don't want to be pregnant. It's more so like, I can't afford to care for another life right now, which I feel like is something that people like don't necessarily want to talk about all the time, because it's definitely like an issue that people are having. And I think that's why it's like we need to be able to pay people within their means that if they want to have a family, they can have a family if they want to. If they don't want to have a family, that's fine too. But like, let's think, or like a birthing, like if you want to birth a family in that way, or even if you want to adopt, like you have to be able to pay people wages in order to help support this kind of effort. And I think that that's oftentimes left out of the conversation when we start talking about access to abortion care. It's like, I know for myself personally, I don't care about the reason. Like if you say you need an abortion, you need an abortion. But like when we start talking about the values of reproductive justice and the ability to parent the families that we want to parent and also have bodily autonomy, I ask myself, is it really bodily autonomy if I'm being forced into this way because of economic reasons? Like, sounds oppressive to me. Like, it's just like...
And that kind of, I guess that kind of leads into my question, because we talked about like, the election is coming up in November. And I know that also, if I'm not, please correct me if I'm wrong, Georgia's legislative session starts in January, right? So I'm wondering, because we're talking about, we talked about student loans, we talked about, of course, reproductive justice and reproductive health. I'm wondering, what is the connection between these voting, like voting and voting rights and reproductive rights?
I mean, we got a great lesson learned with the election of 2018 going into legislative session of 2019, because the reality is that elected officials will only really listen to voters in their area because they're interested in maintaining their seats of power. So in 2018, with the gubernatorial election that we had then, that was the result of widespread voter suppression, to the point that, like, there was one point where Black and brown people were targeted at the voter rolls, and us and our partners did work to make sure that those people did end up in the rolls, because it was like filing a lawsuit against them, showing them that, like, this because of the exact match law, because of the signatures. And so that was a part of it. We experienced, like, I personally experienced a polling location that unlawfully closed their doors early, and we had to, like, fight them to, like, open them back up. And this happened, like, all across the state. There was places where there weren't machines working, people waiting, like, anywhere from, like, 5 to 12 hours to vote, which is really ridiculous. So, like, I'm like, all of this stuff is happening. And then in 2019, the first thing that's legislated off is reproductive rights through HB 481, which we now know has gone fully into effect, because that was signed actually in 2019, before they filed the injunction, as we talked about in previous episodes. But the connection is that, like, I remember being at the Capitol in 2019, and we're trying to, like, talk to these legislators, which in itself is its own experience, when you're trying to, like, plead your humanity to people who are defiantly saying, like, no, like, just, like, not acknowledging that humanity of folks. And legislators just coming down to us, like, are you in my area? Are you a voter? Oh, you're not? Okay. And then just moving on, or, like, literally running away from talking to people and stuff like that. And so I know we did, like, a lot of efforts, and there was actually one in particular. I can't remember the legislator's name, but she was based in, her area was in Sandy Springs, like, which is just north of Atlanta, for folks who are tuning in. And she was a Republican, and they were really, and her party was really pushing her to vote for the bill. But through the efforts of us and our partners, we were able to rally, like, enough voters in her district to contact her. She ended up flipping and voting against that bill. Which I was like, which is really important when we start thinking about, like, the power of what it means for voters in particular to be active beyond the ballot box. And this is also too why it's important that we continue to retain our voting rights, because of the way that the structure is stimulated. So, like, when we start talking about, like, the idea of making voting much more accessible, like having a national holiday where people can, businesses are closed, you go vote, kind of situation, where I know in Georgia, we have a law on the books where employers have to give people at least 2 hours to go vote. If they are working, like, an 8-hour day, you get 2 hours to go vote. Things like that, like, making things much more accessible is really important. But this is also too where some of the pushback is, because, I mean, and I think I mentioned this in another episode, we're starting to see is that, like, a lot of voters, when actually pushed on the issues of abortion care and reproductive rights, are not really in favor of government being involved in it. And there's actually a small minority of people who are currently the loudest folks in the room, or they're currently the people who are seated in power. And that's why it's really important for us to have those access to voting rights, to really, say, like, no, we want people who are actually going to stand for the issues that are there. I mean, the national data shows that, like, 70% of Americans want abortion care. The data that we've collected personally at, like, Women Engaged shows that, like, almost 80% of the people that we talk to want access to abortion care. So it's kind of like, when you have those kind of numbers, why are we having bills like this even being introduced? And it's because they're also suppressing, when you peel it back, the people who are answering, they're also trying to suppress those votes. Because with the data that we collected primarily from Black folks in Georgia. And so it's really interesting to see it in that way.
Just amazing. No, that's really good. And the wheels are definitely turning. And I know, like, we had talked about people not being able to afford, and we also think about, like, healthcare here. in Georgia because like having a baby is expensive. Physically having the baby is very expensive. So I know we kind of talked about this in a meeting that we had yesterday, but like what are like some of the um healthcare statistics that you shared yesterday? And why is it when we talk about, of course, the limit on abortion that we have now, why is expanding Medicaid so important right now, considering the 6-week abortion ban that we have?
Ooh wee. Okay, so I'm gonna talk again. In Georgia, for folks who are listening, Georgia has not expanded Medicaid through the Affordable Care Act. People know the Affordable Care Act as Obamacare, just for context. Um, and so that means that Georgia leaves every year literally like millions of dollars on the table, which could be utilized to beef up our healthcare system here in the state. Due to not expanding Medicaid, we've actually seen over 13 hospitals across the state close, a lot of those in Black and Brown counties. So that means that we are left with some counties that don't even have an OBGYN, let alone a doctor in their area, where traveling or seeking healthcare sometimes means having to have the luxury or the ability to take off from work and drive 2 hours outside of your area to go and seek care. So that's like the first thing. But because they haven't expanded Medicaid, what happens is what we mean by expanding Medicaid means like increasing the threshold for people to qualify. Because right now it's based off of the poverty line, which I think is at like 137%. That varies based off of like incomes from state to state, things like that. But essentially, what happens is that we have a group of people who don't necessarily qualify for Medicaid because they don't make less enough, but they don't make enough to necessarily afford the premiums that are on the marketplace or things of that nature. And so we'll rather opt out to just pay the fine that comes from that than to actually pay for healthcare, which that means that like in Georgia, roughly 1 in 8 Georgians don't have healthcare. And we call this the healthcare wage gap. That statistic actually grows larger based off of the socioeconomic factors. So Black Georgians are roughly like 1 in 5. When we start looking at queer Black Georgians, it starts looking at like 1 in 3, 1 in 4 who don't have access to care. And this stuff is really important as we start really peeling back the layers because it's like you need access to healthcare. And of course, there's also the issues around like, medical biases and things like that, because we also talk about how Georgia is leading the nation in Black maternal mortality, which is a huge issue as well. So we look at that in the light of it and what it means for people to get care, not only when they're pregnant or thereafter, because that Black maternal mortality rate is actually including deaths that occur up to 1 year after birth. So that means that like when we start looking at those numbers and we start talking about the care, like care doesn't necessarily just stop after folks give birth, but it's important that people, their infants, and the person who birthed the infant gets the care that they need because people are still losing their lives up to 1 year after birth due to complications or lack thereof of access to care. So that's why it's really important that we do that. And sometimes, like especially in Georgia, oftentimes like it's like it's always talked about, but we need more pressure. We need more people to advocate for it because it's really important. I mean, I just want to say, like having healthcare for folks is really important. And I think, it again ties back to like these rising costs of living and things of that nature. Like I know from personal experience, just for myself as a single person, when I was on the marketplace, my monthly premium was like almost $400. Which is ridiculous. Like, and that's not even talking about like deductibles that you have to pay, things of that nature. And also too having to make hard decisions like, do I just stay at home and be sick? And just wait, right? And then that's when we start talking about like, why hospital emergency rooms are being used as like forms of like primary care for some folks. So yeah, so that's my spiel about the healthcare stats in Georgia.
Yeah, and I mean, Michelle, you just painted a wonderful picture, and it just makes me think about like the only thing I feel like I would even add to that is just we're in the context of like what has been happening recently, with the overturn of Roe v. Wade and Georgia's 11th Circuit upholding HB 41, is that Georgia already has an expanded Medicaid. So Georgia is, like you were saying, Michelle, already experiences these high rates of like preventable deaths. Like, we're just talking about people who just have to negotiate on a daily basis. You know, do I go to the emergency room? Do I travel? Do I take off work? I may like lose my job in order to like get myself checked out and, you know, take care of my like health, because I don't have health insurance. And so in a state like that, also with folks with children that don't have access because families uninsured, the children don't have preventative care. And so these are the states that we've seen recently in Georgia that want to create a more volatile environment around reproductive care before showing that it wants to become a more generous and like supportive state when it comes to low income and working families, when it comes to expanding Medicaid so that folks can at least take care of themselves with all of these new healthcare restrictions that have been passed. And also, I think that, you know, it's important. It's like the way we know that like reproductive justice is attached to voting rights, in that the states with the most restrictive reproductive laws are also the states that have some of the most restrictive voting laws, as we saw with Georgia in 2021 with SB 202. They're also the states that have the highest number of uninsured women and Black women between the ages of 19 and like 64, I think is the statistic. So, I mean, I'm just to repeat myself, it's just like, while making no progress in areas of voting rights, if nothing else, being more restrictive, it there seems to be like this convenient disconnect between that and just completely stripping away and you know, reproductive care and making the environment even more hostile to people who at the end of the day just want to be able to have bodily autonomy and to be able to seek the care they need. That they're, you know, as patients, the person that would know the best would be the patient themselves and their doctor, not necessarily an elected official.
Yeah, thank you both for that. And really, what like really came to mind, especially Michelle, when you mentioned like the Black mortality, like mother mortality rate in Georgia, I was thinking of, and how I didn't even know it counts after a year. It's like the first year, and it made me think, because I know plenty of stories of um, just people in general, Black people in general, knowing that their pains weren't taken seriously until they went to a Black doctor. And then it kind of made me think of like, OMG, student loans, and how a lot of people don't want to become doctors, lawyers, or anything like that, because I'm not trying to have 6 figures worth of student debt. And it just, that was really interesting. I love when we can like tie things all together, because that's very important. Like, we need more people in the healthcare field who could take people seriously so things like that don't happen. Because I mean, the grandfather of gynecology thought that Black women didn't feel pain. So like, we need people who can go into these spaces. And I can't even tell you how many people I know personally who like, I have a Black doctor, and I'm so happy that I could have someone who could take me seriously. So I love what you guys brought up, and it's crazy how things are just so connected and we don't even like really think about it. And I guess like, before we like talk about self-care, I would love to kind of discuss, we think about like, why is it so important to expand Medicaid and why people should care about expanding Medicaid. And I'm wondering, how can people get involved with the expansion, with wanting the expansion of Medicaid, but also when we're talking about healthcare and reproductive care, how do we continue to stay inclusive with the people that we're talking about, and understanding the like disparities? I hope that made sense.
Yes, it does. I call it queering the space a bit, like, or like I feel like we got to queer our analysis and our perception about where it is. So like I know, I always see the pushback on social media, and it is where it is. But like when people are like, "Why do you say birthing people instead of women?" Right? But the reality is that everybody who gives birth is not always a woman, and that's just what it is. And that takes a place for people to understand that like one, gender and sex are very two different things, and sex identity is much more complicated than XX and XY scientifically, and we just need to provide space and room for people to be who they are. So that I always preface it with that. But the reason that it's important to have this kind of language is that when we start really again looking at the layers of it, is that like we know that there's a disparity in which Black women are, seen in terms of the medical field. Those perceptions like also change and morph the moment that you say that you're a queer femme, a queer or a Black trans person, or a Black non-binary person in the medical field in terms of like what it means to get the care that you need without facing medical biases. So those disparities actually grow larger. Now, a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't know, because I mean, it's just such a small portion of the population. But I wouldn't say that we're really living into our values of reproductive justice if we don't center those who are the most marginalized. And the reality is if we lift people up who are experiencing those medical biases, such as queer Black folks, then we actually are going to help everyone because they're also facing some of the same biases, just in different aspects of it. It just depends on how people are showing up. So that's why I was like, it's really important to like not only use inclusive language, but think about it from those aspects of it. So when we think about family planning with trans people, which is a conversation that oftentimes doesn't happen in the medical field when people are seeking to do medical transitioning, right? Like, what does it mean for someone who is interested in having children and having a real conversation with their doctors about the effects of hormone replacement therapy and also making provisions for them to be able to have children in the future, whether it's through IVF, surrogacy, or even like having sperm in the sperm bank, things of that nature. Like there's so many different options that people can look at in terms of that. But that's just one example that I have there. But it's also too like looking at it from an economic lens, because same thing, economically, the folks who are most impacted, like our Black trans folks, really lifting up Black trans women and Black trans femmes in particular, who also face a lot of like economic discrimination, which also impacts your ability to be able to afford the care that you need. So I think having those kind of like conversations and being open to that and knowing that that's there really leans in with our values, and that it's also to like, and I'll stop talking after this, is that this working in an abundance mindset. So I find that oftentimes people lash out in these conversations because they don't think there's an abundance. But the reality is that in this world, there are enough resources for everybody to live comfortably. There is enough opportunity for people to do the right thing and give people the care they need. And it doesn't mean that it's taken away from other people. So regardless if you identify as a Black cis woman or a Black cis hetero man, you centering Black trans women or Black queer folks or non-binary folks is not taking away from the ways in which we are showing up for others. It just means that we're also including them, because the biggest misperception of all of this stuff is as if though there's not enough, when in reality there's enough, and we can hold people accountable to all of it. So yeah, that's my tea.
Yes, I also would say that we see the devastating numbers that we see when it comes to preventable Black mortality because of the lack of inclusion in the lack of cultural competence in the medical field. And so when we talk about centering the most marginalized, and we talk about queering our conversations around reproductive justice, we're really, we're really continuing to have that conversation and continue to challenge ourselves to have that conversation in a way that we are caring for all Black people, because the medical field has so far to go when it comes for caring for, all Black people, and all of our experiences, all of our, all of our needs, and all of our identities. And I also think that, oh, I just lost my train of thought a little bit, but just everything that you said, Michelle, is 100% like why we should always make sure that our spaces are inclusive in that respect, because the statistics just show how we're all impacted at these disparate rates, and that's really important to uplift, and to make sure that we're being just truthful and supportive of our entire community.
Yeah, and it makes me think too, for folks who are tuning in, who are new to the show, we had a really great episode with Kai. They run the Kaluntu Reproductive Justice Center. You could check it out on our YouTube page. It's somewhere also on Facebook. I just can't dig it up right now. But Kai is, I believe that they're a doula. And they have really great resources and conversations and information about how to give really great care to queer folks, especially in reproductive spaces. So I just want to shout them out and acknowledge that work, and that if folks are interested in learning more about that, to definitely, one, check out the episode, but also like follow them on Facebook, because they do share really great resources and have really great opportunities for folks who are queer and seeking care, and also people who are interested in learning more about like how you can continue to support those efforts.
Yes, I love that, Michelle. And that reminded me of what I was going to say, is that when we talk about expanding Medicaid, we're also talking about expanding Medicaid to doula services, to culturally competent services that center and recenter Indigenous practices, that intrinsically we're always looking, at Black people as fully human, and meeting, our needs. And so thank you for uplifting Kai's work. And I also, want folks to know, who are watching at home, that expanding Medicaid in the reproductive justice space is about expanding Medicaid to a variety of healthcare professionals who will make the healthcare space and reproductive space safer for all Black people. Which isn't, it's not necessarily, it's not intrinsically, doesn't feel safe to Black people with disabilities, Black queer people, as it stands right now. And so that's another reason why we need to expand Medicaid, getting at the statistic that you shared earlier, Michelle, how we see those numbers increase when it comes to preventable harms.
I just want to say thank you guys for that, because I think that's like everybody's homework, is to learn how to be more inclusive with the way you talk, because we can't just say, like when we think about, even when we talk about, for example, just saying Black Lives Matter, and how people were like, well, when you say Black Lives Matter, you need to be saying all Black Lives Matter, because of course poor Black lives matter, trans Black lives, like, people don't, it's important to bring those identities into the conversation, because they're often forgotten, and sometimes not even forgotten, but purposely left out of these conversations. And I think that's everybody's homework, is to learn how to be more inclusive with the way we talk, because there's a reason why a lot of people don't feel welcomed in certain spaces. It's because they haven't been before. And I love, Michelle, when you said that, like, there's enough to go around. There's more than enough to go around. You censoring Black trans women, it's not going to take any food off your plate. Absolutely none. There's more than enough food at the dinner table to go around. So thank you guys for that. So important. And that's everybody's homework. So how can we be more inclusive?
I want to add to that, also, how can you be more inclusive, but also just thinking about how pervasive the systems that be are in our lives and in our activism. Mm-hmm. So, the reason why even all Black Lives Matter had to become a thing was because when Black Lives Matter started, it was started by 3 queer Black women, but what happened was that it took off centering around mostly Black cis men, and that became like almost the default, right? And so it did lead to the erasure of that, and we have to ask ourselves, why is that the case? And I have my own theories, which is around like the fact that like we live in a patriarchal society, so and it's also easier in terms of advocating for people who have some sense of like power in that way, whereas it may not be as easy to advocate for Black trans or Black queer lives or Black women if you're not knowledgeable or understanding about how these things are pervasive. And it also takes like a little bit of like I don't know what the word is. I don't know if it's boldness or if it's just tenacity or audacity, but you got to be able to like just be able to step into it, knowing that like we're still a growing pool of people who are building up the activism and leadership of people, and that sometimes you are going to have those hard conversations with people and hold people accountable, and that's going to feel a little uncomfy. And so in order to really get more comfortable with that is really just asking ourselves, how does it show up in our day-to-day lives? Like, how does it show up in our practices with our family and friends? And that's always a great place to start in terms of when we start talking about inclusivity, because even like how we offer up room for people to question their sexuality or question their gender identity or have space to express themselves in a very authentic way. So knowing that like somebody can very much comfortable in their gender, but express it in a way that you're traditionally not, used to seeing, and that's okay too. So I want to add that to people's homework, like really questioning how these systems show up there, and then tackling like how do you become more inclusive and more open? Like how do you become a safe place and space in your community for others?
Yeah, I love that. And it's a lot of self-work too, because we have a lot of internalized everything. Like our society is built off of white supremacy. So these systems that we think, are this and this, like you have to really dig down, because it's hard to be like, dang, I kind of have privilege. I have privilege. That's uncomfortable. Knowing that, yes, I'm a Black woman, but I'm also a cis Black woman. Privilege. I was raised in a 2-parent household. Privilege. Like there's certain things, and it is uncomfortable to be like, ooh, like, but you got to do it. It makes the world a better place. And thank you guys so much for that. And I would love, I was so excited. Self-care. What are you guys watching? What are you guys playing? What are you guys looking forward to for this weekend? I know it's supposed to be a little rainy, but I'm interested in what you guys are looking forward to and what you have been doing.
It's that rainy season, and I just feel like self-care is already built in to like the weather for me right now, because I love that kind of weather. Just like those fall showers. So just spending time just like outdoors, and just I think just enjoying a season that I really just always look forward to every year. Also, I'm just always a big promoter on like rest and like sleep, and I think everything starts with sleep. And so I think just making sure that I get enough sleep to begin with, so I can even start to talk about rest, because if you know I think that I notice a difference in just my overall like outlook when I feel like I'm making sure that my body is taken care of. So sometimes that looks like, what I'm putting in my body and eating. And sometimes that just looks like, you know, making sure that you get enough sleep. I got advice from a wonderful mentor one time that as soon as I graduated college, they were like, you need to have bedtime. And so I was like, what? I'm still, out here, I want to go out and do stuff. They were like, yeah, that's great. But you'll like, trust me, like you'll appreciate it. So yeah, I'm putting in a plug for have a bedtime.
What am I doing? I started recently getting into like writing more. Like writing, I think is something that's really important when you're like dealing with big feels and stuff like that. And then of course I'm playing games. So lately I just finished Stray.
Mm-hmm.
Really good story. Oh my gosh. First of all, love being a stray cat, get to live my dreams of knocking things off counters that are too close to the edge. But it's like a set in like a post-apocalyptic world that's like way in the future, in a world where humans no longer exist and there's sentient robots that act like they're human. So it's really interesting. And then the other game I just finished that. So the game I'm now playing is Horizon Zero Dawn, which is another post-apocalyptic kind of game. Which I mean, I have my own thoughts, but there's just like a lot of post-apocalyptic media out there. And so yeah, like I almost wrote my master's thesis on that. But uh, I definitely think it's very interesting. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing for my self-care right now.
I love that for you guys. I've been reading more, and I love that for me because I can finish a book in a day if I really sit down. And I'm like, the book can be 400 pages. If I sit down and say, Zoe, get it done, I'll get it done. So I'm focused now on reading and also like telling people, hey, I'm reading right now. I cannot talk to you. I'm also learning that like boundaries after a certain time. Zoe's reading. So you can't talk to her right now. So I've been reading. I'm trying to start over with Game of Thrones so I can watch the new show. So that's where I'm also doing now. I'm trying to binge Game of Thrones until season 7. People told me don't even watch season 8. There's no need to. So I'm like, I'm not even gonna do it. I'm gonna go straight in to the new show after I finish season 7. But that's really how I'm taking care of myself. Mainly reading is the main thing I'm focused on. Is getting these books done. So yeah, but thank you guys so much for joining me today. And I hope you guys have an awesome weekend. And I'm just gonna go over the organizational updates again, and I'll let you guys have the rest of your day back. So of course, if you want to update your voter registration, please visit our website for more information, www.womenengage.org. And also there is a bit.ly link. And also, we are hiring canvassers. So please email your resume to info@womenengage.org. And last but not least, please donate to our 828 campaign. And of course, if you can't donate, please share to all your networks, get people involved and things like that. Everything is greatly appreciated. So yeah, I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your Thursday and an awesome and safe weekend. See you next time.